Thank you very much for joining us again today. Today we're going to talk about reversing accounts payable checks in Sage 100 Cloud. Let's take a look at our agenda. So the first thing we're going to do is actually process a check run. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this process. So we'll do a payment selection, we'll show you check maintenance, and we'll print the checks and then update the check register. Then we're going to get into the reversing checks process. First, I'm going to show you how to reverse a single check manually, and then I'm going to show you the new feature that was added with Sage 100 Cloud version 2020. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is process that check run. So here I am in Sage 100 Cloud, and I'm going to go into Accounts Payable and go into Invoice Payment Selection. And let's go ahead and change our due date out for a couple of months here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose July 31st, 2025, and push the select button. And what this is going to do is give me a list of invoices that I can then choose to pay based on the criteria that was on the previous screen. So the only thing I changed was the due date. So this is a list of all invoices that have a due date on or before July 31st, 2025. And I'm just going to select all of them here. So you can see I've selected $326,000 worth of invoices to pay, and I'll say OK. And I could have used Control-click to select individual invoices, Shift-click to select ranges of invoices, but regardless, that screen allows us to choose which invoices we're going to pay. Now, before we print the checks, we always want to make sure that we print the payment selection listing report to identify all the invoices that we're going to pay. That way, we can correct invoices, make changes before we print the checks. So to do that from this screen, I'll just push the printer icon. That'll take me to the print screen for the payment selection listing report. And let's just go ahead and preview this. You should do this every time to make sure that you know what checks you're going to print before you print them. So there's a couple of things here. It'll show us every check that it's going to print, and it's going to be sorted by vendor number. And then at the end of the report, it's also going to give us a total number of checks. So it's going to tell us that we're going to print 26 checks. Well, I've decided that I want to not print a check for one of these invoices. So I'm looking through my list, and I have this invoice for Anders Auto Repair for $1,040.50 for a new engine. And I've decided that I'm not paying that yet because we haven't actually received that engine yet. So let's go ahead and close this. And it's going to ask us if we want to print the checks. We'll go ahead and say no. Now I'm going to go into check and electronic payment maintenance. Now, check and electronic payment maintenance allows us to edit any check prior to printing it. And so when I come in here, I can use the flashlight lookup that'll show me all the existing checks, and I can choose that check for Anders Auto Repair. And I can see, again, the invoices that are going to be paid by this check. Now, you can always edit the payment amount. So if you said, I don't want to pay the entire amount, I just want to pay a portion, you can just change the amount that you want to pay. So for example, if I just wanted to pay $500 on that invoice, I can just change the payment amount to $500. And once I do that, that will leave an invoice balance of $540.50. If I don't want to pay the invoice entirely, I can just delete the row. So now I've decided not to pay that invoice at all. If I don't want to write a check to this vendor, I can just delete the check entirely. Now, regardless of what I do here, once again, I always recommend that you print the payment listing report before you print the checks. So let's go ahead and push the printer icon and look at our listing report again. So now you can see I'm only paying 2 invoices for Anders Auto Repair. And if I go to the total, I still have 26 checks, but my total amount is now changed. So now this time, let's go ahead and print the checks. So the check printing screen comes up. I'll go ahead and say yes to print the remittance information from the vendor. Our first check number is 14. I've decided that I'm going to do this. Now, this is stuff that you normally wouldn't have to do, but this is a test company, and I just have a couple of settings that I need to change. Now, ideally, I would print these checks to a local printer or a network printer, but to save time, I'm just going to go ahead and print these checks to Microsoft Print to PDF. So they'll print to a PDF, and which will be a lot faster than waiting for my printer to print through all these checks. So let's go ahead and just say print and let it print all these checks. So imagine these checks are coming out on the printer now. But what I have to do is actually save this PDF, and I'll do that. And there we go. And our last check number was check number 39. So we just printed checks number from 14 through 39. And we'll go ahead and remove the checks from the printer and go ahead and print the check register. Now, actually, the check register is going to print to paperless office. So I'll go ahead and print this. And the check and payment register is going to go to paperless office, but then open on the screen and give me an option to update. So we'll go ahead and say yes to update the check and payment register. Now, for those of you that are used to seeing the daily transaction register after this, there's a new feature that's been added in Sage 100 Cloud where it can automatically print and update the daily transaction register. So it's not prompting me for that information. But now we've gone ahead and updated our check register. Back in our agenda, we're now going to talk about reversing checks. So we have a number of different scenarios that can take place here. The first one I'm going to show you is reverse a single check. And so this scenario may be that we've sent the check to the vendor, but the vendor never received the check, and the check hasn't cleared the bank. So we now have come to the conclusion that the check has been lost in transit, and we still need to pay the vendor. So what we're going to do is call the bank, put a stop payment on that check. So if the check shows up sometime in the future, it can't be cashed or deposited in the vendor's account. But then we're going to reverse the check in Sage 100, which in turn will reopen that invoice for payment. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to show you the check that we're going to reverse. So I'm going to go to vendor inquiry, call up the vendor Airway Property, and we'll just look at the checks. And you can see here I have check number 7 for $33.50 that paid a couple of invoices, these two invoices. And that's the check that has gotten lost in the mail. Now, it may also be that you've done a check run, you've updated the check register, and the signer has just decided that they're not going to sign this particular check, has made the decision not to pay this vendor. And so the check isn't even going to be mailed, which is fine as well, but we've already updated the check register. Therefore, we still have to reverse this check. So reversing the check is really easy. We just go into manual check and payment entry, and we'll enter some information on this screen. Okay, so I'll create a batch, and the check was out of bank code D, and the check number was check number 7. So when I type in the number 7 and tab out of the field, it's going to ask me if it's a check reversal. It's recognizing that this check already exists in the system. I'm going to say yes, and it's going to ask me if I want to recall those invoices that were paid by the check. And 99.9% of the time, I recommend that you say yes to this. And so that'll pull up the check information. It knows the amount was $33.50. It knows the original check date was 5/22. It knows the vendor was 01 Airway. And because I said yes to recall the original invoices, it pulled those invoices up as well with negative amounts that we're going to apply. So now we'll just go ahead and accept this, and then we'll print the manual check and payment register. Select my batch. My posting date is 5/31, and we'll go ahead and print. And once again, this is going to paperless office. So there's the reversal. Shows us the amount of each invoice that's been reversed and the entire check, and we'll go ahead and update that. And once again, I have my system set up so that it's going to automatically print and update the daily transaction register, so it's not going to prompt me for that. So now let's go look at the vendor and see what that looks like. I'll call up Airway Property, First, we'll look at the checks, and you'll see that there is a check number 7 and a check number 7 that was a reversal. If we look at one of those invoices that were involved, for example, 106020, you can see here was the original invoice. This was the payment that was done on 5/22, and here's the check reversal. Shows the payment as a positive amount because it's actually a reversal of a payment. So it adds back in. Notice that the balance of this invoice has now been brought back to the original balance of $17.50. So the next time I do a check run, it would select this invoice for payment. So this is how you do an individual check reversal. And up until Sage 100 Cloud version 2020, this was the only way to reverse checks. Well, the problem was that sometimes we would do an entire check run and we needed to reverse all of the checks in the check run. And I've had situations where that was dozens of checks and the user had to go in and manually reverse dozens of checks one at a time. Now we don't have to do that. We can now reverse an entire check run. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And this is very easy. So in accounts payable, if I scroll down to my utilities section, there's a new utility called reverse check run. So I'm just going to select that. And when I select this, it's going to ask me if I want to search for the check run based on the bank code and any of the check numbers that were in the check run, or I can search by the source journal and register number. So if I choose that, it would be the CD and then the register number. But let's go ahead and choose the option for bank code and check number. And I remember this was bank code D. And remember the first check was 14, the last check was 39. So it doesn't really matter what number I type in here as long as it's between 14 and 39, but I'll choose 14 and I'll tab. And what it's done here is identified that the register was CD11 and it's brought in all of the checks that were in that check run. So to reverse them, I'm just going to say proceed. And I'm going to go ahead and print reversal register. This is a new register, didn't exist before, and we'll take a look at it. So the register number starts with RC as in reverse check, and then the register number, and it's going to list all of the checks that it's reversing, just like my manual reversing did, and the invoices that are being reversed. And we'll go ahead and update that. And once again, I have it set to automatically post to the general ledger. So very simple to reverse an entire check run. Let's see how that looks at the vendor. So once again, let's go to vendor inquiry. And one of those checks was for Airway Properties. Look at the checks, and you can see we have a reversal for check 14. And once again, we can drill in and see any of the invoices that were paid. So one of the invoices is June-4913, and we can go to the invoices tab and look at that invoice, and you can see there's the original payment and then the check reversal. So this is a really cool feature that's been added to Sage 100 version 2020, but it's only available in the cloud version. So if you're not on the subscription plan, you won't have this feature available. So be aware of that. So to recap, we did an entire check run where we did the payment selection. Then I showed you how to edit those checks before they print, either by changing the amount that's going to be paid, delete an invoice that's going to be paid, or delete the check entirely. I did not mention you can actually add invoices in that screen as well. So if your payment selection didn't pick up all the invoices you wanted to pay, when you're in that screen, you can also add invoices. And then we went through a couple of examples of reversing checks. We did a single check, and then we reversed an entire check run. Please subscribe to our channel and user groups. You can find us on LinkedIn. Our website is www.nimsassociates.com, and you can contact us at nimsassociates at erp@nimsassociates.com, or call the number that's on your screen. And we really thank you for your time and your attention today.